still just me. Madam Speaker, thank you for your kind words, and thank you for your service to this institution. Secondly, I want to welcome all of our new members and their families on what is a very special day. All of us who've been here remember vividly that first day that we served here. And I think any of us can tell you that you'll never forget today. My own family is here as well. I think you've just met Debbie, and next to Debbie are Lindsay and Tricia, our two daughters. Welcome. We're glad that you're here. 10 of my 11 brothers and sisters and sister-in-laws and brother-in-laws are here as well. My poor brother Greg, who runs a restaurant down in Georgia, was unable to be here, but I wanted to acknowledge him. I also want to acknowledge some of my close friends that are here from the other side of the Capitol. You know, Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, is here, and two of my best buds, Richard Burr from North Carolina, Saxby Chambliss from Georgia, along with, you know, my buddy Latham. Thank you for being here, gentlemen. I appreciate it. I'm honored and humbled to represent a great, hardworking community in Congress. The peoples of Ohio's 8th Congressional District continue to afford me the privilege to serve, for which I am deeply grateful. We gather here today at a time of great challenges. Nearly 1 in 10 of our neighbors is out of work. Health care costs are still rising for American families. Our spending has caught up with us, and our debt soon will eclipse the entire size of our national economy. Hard work and tough decisions will be required of the 112th Congress. No longer can we fall short. No longer can we kick the can down the road. The people voted to end business as usual, and today we begin to carry out their instructions. In the Catholic faith, we enter into a season of service by having ashes marked on our head. The ashes remind us that life in all of its forms is very fragile. Our time on this earth, fleeting. But as the ashes are delivered, we hear those humbling words. Remember, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. The American people have humbled us. They have refreshed our memories to just how temporary the privilege of serving is. They have reminded us that everything here is on loan from them. That includes this gavel, which I accept cheerfully and gratefully, knowing that I am but its caretaker. After all, this is the people's house. This is their Congress. It's about them, not about us. What they want is a government that's honest, accountable, and responsive to their needs. A government that respects individual liberty, honors our heritage, and bows before the public that it serves. Let's start with the rules package that the House will consider today. If passed, it will change how this institution operates, with an emphasis on real transparency, greater accountability, and a renewed focus on our Constitution. Our aim will be to give the government back to the American people. In seeking this goal, we will part with some of the rituals that have come to characterize this institution under majorities, both Republican and Democrat alike. We will dispense with the conventional wisdom that bigger bills are always better. That fast legislating is good legislating. Allowing amendments and open debate makes the legislative process less efficient than our forefathers had intended. These misconceptions have been the basis for the rituals of a modern Washington. They, in my opinion, have not been served well to the American people. Today, mindful of the lessons of the past, that we open a new chapter. Legislators and the public will have 3 days to read a bill before it comes to a vote. Legislation will be more focused, properly scrutinized, and constitutionally sound. Committees, once bloated, will be smaller with a renewed mission, including oversight. Old rules that have made it easy to increase spending will be replaced by new reforms that make it easier to cut spending. And we will start by cutting Congress's own budget. But above all else, we will welcome the battle of ideas, encourage it, engage it openly, honestly, and respectfully. As the chamber closest to the people, the House works best when it is allowed to work its will. And I ask members of this body to join me in recognizing this common truth. And to my colleagues in the majority, my message is this. We will honor our pledge to America, built on a process of listening to the American people. We will stand firm on our constitutional principles that built our party and built the great nation. We will do these things, however, in a manner that restores and respects the time-honored right of the minority to an honest debate, a fair and open process. And to my friends in the minority, I offer a commitment: openness. Once a tradition of this institution, but increasingly scarce in recent decades, will be the new standard. There were no open rules in the House in the last Congress. In this one, there will be many. And with this restored openness, however, come a restored responsibility. You will not have the right to willfully disrupt the proceedings of the People's House. But you will always have the right to a robust debate in an open process that allows you to represent your constituents, to make your case, offer alternatives, and be heard. In time, I believe this framework will allow the House to be a place where the people's will is done. It will also, I hope, rebuild trust amongst us and the people we serve, and in so doing, provide a guidepost for those who follow us in the service of our nation. To our new members, Democrat and Republican alike, as you take the oath today, I know that you do so mindful of this shared goal, and know that your constituents have placed much trust in you. As Speaker, I feel part of my job is to help each of you do your job well, regardless of your political party. My hope is that every new member, and indeed every member, will be comfortable with approaching me with regard to matters of the House. We will not always get it right, and we will not always agree on what is right. There's a great deal of scar tissue that's been built up on both sides of the aisle. We can't ignore that, nor should we. My belief has always been that we can disagree without being disagreeable. Now, that's why it's critical that this institution operate in a manner that permits a free exchange of ideas and resolves our honest differences through a fair debate and vote. We may have different, sometimes very different ideas about how to go achieving the common good. It is why we serve. Let us now move forward, humble in our demeanor, steady in our principles, dedicated to proving worthy of the trust and confidence that has been placed in each of us. If we brace ourselves to do our duty and do what we say we're going to do, I don't think there's, together, anything that we can't accomplish, again, on behalf of the people we serve. More than a country, America is an idea. And it's our job to pass that posterity of blessings that have been bestowed on us to those generations that follow us. I want to wish all of you the very best. Welcome to the People's House. Welcome to the 112th Congress. I am now ready to take the oath of office, and I ask the Dean of the House, the Honorable John Dingell of Michigan, to administer the oath of office.
I thank you. If the gentleman from Ohio will please raise his right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which you are about to enter, so help you God.
I do.
Congratulations, Mr. Speaker.
Hey. According to precedent, the chair will swear in members-elect en masse. The members-elect will rise, and the chair will now administer the oath of office. If all members could raise their right hands. Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of your office on which you are about to enter, so help you God? I do. Congratulations. I got it. The House will be in order. The House will be in order. Members would clear the well, and for members would take seats. The House will be in order. Recognizes the gentleman from Texas, the chairman of the Republican Conference, Mr. Hensherling.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman will suspend. The gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, as chairman of the Republican Conference, I'm directed by that conference to notify the House officially that the Republican members have selected as Majority Leader the gentleman from Virginia, the Honorable Eric Cantor.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and congratulations to you, Mr. Speaker, and congratulations to my colleague and chair of the Republican Conference. As chairman of the Democratic Caucus, I have been directed to report to the House the Democratic members have selected as Minority Leader the gentlewoman from California, the Honorable Nancy D'Alessandro Pelosi.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hensherling.
Mr. Speaker, as chairman of the Republican Conference, I'm directed by that conference to notify the House officially that the Republican members have selected as Majority Whip the gentleman from California, the Honorable Kevin McCarthy.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As chairman of the Democratic Caucus, I have been directed to report to the House that the Democratic members have elected as Minority Whip the gentleman from Maryland, the Honorable Steny Hoyer, and as Assistant Democratic Leader, the gentleman from South Carolina, the Honorable James Clyburn.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hensherling.
Mr. Speaker, I offer a privileged resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 1, resolved that Karen L. Haas of the state of Maryland be and is hereby chosen Clerk of the House of Representatives, that Wilson L. Livingood of the Commonwealth of Virginia be and is hereby chosen Sergeant at Arms of the House of Representatives, that Daniel J. Strodel of the District of Columbia be and is hereby chosen Chief Administrative Officer of the House of Representatives, and that Father Daniel P. Coughlin of the state of Illinois be and is hereby chosen Chaplain of the House of Representatives.
The gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I too wish to congratulate my counterpart, the gentleman from Connecticut, on his re-election. And at this time, Mr. Speaker, I yield to the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Larson, for the purpose of offering an amendment.
I thank my friend and colleague from Texas. I have an amendment to the resolution, but before offering the amendment, Mr. Speaker, I request that there be a division of the question on the resolution so that we may have a separate vote, as we traditionally do on the chaplain.
The question will be divided. The question is on agreeing to that portion of the resolution providing for the election of the chaplain. Those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The portion of the resolution is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut.
Mr. Speaker, I offer an amendment to the resolution offered by the gentleman of Texas.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Larson of Connecticut, that John Lawrence of the state of New Jersey be and is hereby chosen Clerk of the House of Representatives, that Alexis Covey Brandt of the state of Maryland be and is hereby chosen Sergeant at Arms of the House of Representatives, that Yelperton Watkins of the state of South Carolina be and is hereby chosen Chief Administrative Officer of the House of Representatives.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Connecticut. Those in favor indicate by saying aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. Question is on the remainder of the resolution offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor indicate by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The resolution is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Will the officers just elected kindly present themselves in the well of the House? If you'll raise your right hand, do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which you are about to enter, so help you God? Congratulations.
Thank you.
From Oklahoma, please present himself in the well. And will you raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which you are about to enter, so help you God? Congratulations, Mr. Sullivan.
First, does the gentleman from Virginia, the Majority Leader, rise?
Mr. Speaker, I offer a privilege resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
Clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 2, resolved that the Senate be informed that a quorum of the House of Representatives has assembled, that John A. Boehner, a representative from the state of Ohio, has been elected Speaker, and that Karen L. Haas, a citizen of the state of Maryland, has been elected Clerk of the House of Representatives of the 112th Congress.
Without objection, the resolution is agreed to and the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I offer a privilege resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
Clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 3, resolved that a committee of 2 members be appointed by the Speaker on the part of the House of Representatives to join with a committee on the part of the Senate to notify the President of the United States that a quorum of each House has assembled and Congress is ready to receive any communication that he may be pleased to make.
Without objection, the resolution is agreed to and the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Objection. Pursuant to House Resolution 3, the Chair announces the Speaker's appointment of the following members to the committee on the part of the House to join a committee on the part of the Senate to notify the President of the United States that a quorum of each House is assembled and then Congress is ready to receive any communications that he may be pleased to make.
The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Cantor, and the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Pelosi.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan, the Dean of the House, rise?
Mr. Speaker, I offer a privileged resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
Clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 4, resolved that the clerk be instructed to inform the President of the United States that the House of Representatives has elected John A. Boehner, a representative from the state of Ohio, as Speaker, and Karen L. Haas as a citizen of the state of Maryland as clerk of the House of Representatives for the 112th Congress.
Without objection, the resolution is agreed to and the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, the Majority Leader, Mr. Cantor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I offer a privilege resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
Clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 5, resolved that the rules of the House of Representatives of the 111th Congress, including applicable provisions.
I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be considered as read and printed in the record.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with and the gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 hour. For what purpose does the gentleman from the District of Columbia rise?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to offer a motion that is at the desk.
Clerk will report the motion. The gentleman from Virginia.
I offer a motion.
Gentleman from Virginia. Clerk will first report the gentlelady's motion, and then we'll recognize the Majority Leader. Clerk will report the gentlelady from the District of Columbia's motion. We're finding it.
Read what's typed.
Clerk will report the gentlelady's motion.
Ms. Norton moves to refer the resolution to a select committee of 5 members to be appointed by the Speaker, not more than 3 of whom shall be from the same political party, with instructions not to report back the same until it has conducted a full and complete study of and made a determination on and constitutionality of the provision that would be eliminated from the rules that granted voting rights in the Committee of the Whole to the delegates from the District of Columbia, America Samoa, Guam, the Virgin Islands, and the Northern Mariana Islands, and the resident commissioner from Puerto Rico, including the decision of the United States Court of Appeals of the District of Columbia in Michael v. Anderson, 14F3D 623 D.C., Circular 1994, which upheld the constitutionality of these voting rights.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Mr. Speaker, I offer a motion.
The clerk will report the gentleman's motion.
Mr. Cantor of Virginia moves to lay on the table the motion to refer.
Questions on the motion to table? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker,
Gentlelady from the District of
on the
Columbia.
motion I asked for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having arisen. The yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device, and this will be a 15-minute vote.
On this very first day of the 112th Congress, all members sworn in, and a vote that was really not expected. This is a procedural vote. Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton of the District of Columbia, seeking to at least delay some of the plans of the Republicans in the House rules, the new House rules that they have yet to debate or vote on today. Part of those rules would end the ability the delegates, including Delegate Norton from the District of Columbia, and the resident commissioner to vote in, to preside over the committee of the whole, the committee of the whole House on the State of the Union when they gather together for debate over bills. That is part of the rules package that Republicans will offer. Obviously, Delegate Norton opposing that and seeking it to commit it to study to a committee for further study, and this a procedural vote on that and the very first vote in the new House. The 112th Congress gavelled in today in both the House and the Senate at noon Eastern. Here in the U.S. House, John Boehner, as expected, was elected Speaker by a vote of 241 to 173, with 19 votes going elsewhere, many of those going for Heath Shuler. John Boehner taking the Speaker's chair. And things fairly scripted out for the rest of the day, including later on today the consideration, debate, and vote on a package of new rules that the House has developed, as is their privilege as the new majority party now in the U.S. House. And Delegate Norton from the District of Columbia objecting to part of those rules. She is seeking to take part of those rules that would restrict, actually would end the ability of the delegates and the resident commissioner to vote or preside over the committee of the whole House. And Eric Cantor, the new majority leader, seeking here to table that motion. So a procedural vote unanticipated early on, and as we mentioned, the House has yet to take up that actual package of rules that will be coming up later today, and also a vote on those rules as well. We can tell you about later on in the week, tomorrow in the U.S. House, look for a reading of the U.S. Constitution in the House tomorrow, expected sometime after 11 o'clock Eastern. And then on Friday, it's expected that the House will have a initial debate, at least on the repeal of the health care bill. All of that ahead later this week in the House. The U.S. Senate is also in today. They gavelled in at noon Eastern as well, swearing in new members. And that continues now. You can follow Senate debate, of course, on C-SPAN 2. It is exactly 4 years and 1 day since Nancy Pelosi took the Speaker's gavel. Well, today, John Boehner elected to that position. 241 votes for John Boehner, 173 for Nancy Pelosi, and 19 other votes going elsewhere, including 11 for Heath Shuler. You had Congressman Dennis Cardoza voting for Jim Costa, and then Jim Costa voting for Dennis Cardoza. Also, the now Minority Leader Steny Hoyer receiving a vote in that. There were 19 either other votes or present votes in the election for Speaker. Here on the House floor, it is a procedural vote on a motion to table a resolution by Eleanor Holmes Norton, the delegate, the representative from the District of Columbia. This is her objection to a proposed rule by Republicans in their package of rules that will be coming up for debate and vote later on. That specific rule would end the ability of the delegates, and that includes Eleanor Holmes Norton, and the resident commissioner to vote in or preside over the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union. That's when the House gathers together in the Committee of the Whole to consider legislation and hear Eric Cantor, the new Majority Leader, on a motion to table that resolution. Since the early 1900s, the House has constituted itself as 435 representatives. There are currently 242 Republicans, 193 Democrats. There are also delegates from the District of Columbia, American Samoa, Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, and the Virgin Islands, and the resident commissioner from Puerto Rico. In the past, they have participated in House action. They've been able to preside over and vote in the Committee of the Whole. These would be votes as the House is considering legislation, but however, they're not allowed a final vote privilege. Now, the Republicans' plan in part of their rules package is to take away that ability for the delegates and the resident commissioner to preside over or vote in the Committee of the Whole. D.C. Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton objected to that and called for the House to take that part of that rules package and send it to a special committee for consideration. Republicans objected. The new Majority Leader, Eric Cantor, proposing a motion to table that resolution by Eleanor Holmes Norton, and thus the first recorded vote, 15-minute vote, on the House floor. The House came in today, as did the U.S. Senate, at noon Eastern. Later in the House, we anticipate that they will take up that entire rules package. We'll see debate on that and vote on that as well. Over in the Senate, general speeches are underway, including discussion on possible changes in rules there, the filibuster rules specifically. Tom Harkin of Iowa speaking on that now, and you can follow Senate coverage on C-SPAN 2. Meanwhile, over on C-SPAN 3, you can follow the ceremonial swearing in that is happening throughout the day. The House members being sworn in by the new Speaker, John Boehner. Follow that at C-SPAN 3. It's also available online, as are all of our networks, at cspan.org. A busy and historic day in the nation's capital, the start of the 112th Congress. The U.S. Senate and U.S. House coming in at noon Eastern. The Senate now with 53 Democrats in there, still a majority for the Democrats in the Senate, as opposed to the 60 they had before. And in the U.S. House now, the Republicans in charge with 242 Republican members in the House and 193 Democrats. Also changes at the White House as Robert Gibbs announcing plans to step down from his position as White House spokesman in the coming weeks. Wall Street Journal is reporting this afternoon also that President Obama is planning to speak to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Apparently that will be sometime in February, according to the Wall Street Journal's Washington Wire. The vote on the House floor, not really anticipated. This is a vote on a specific part of the rules package that the Republicans are proposing. Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton of Washington, D.C. is objecting to the provision in that set of rules that would end the ability of delegates such as herself and the commissioner, the resident commissioner of Puerto Rico, to vote in and take part in and preside over or at least preside over and vote in the committee considering legislation, as they've been able to do a motion to submit that portion of those proposed rules to a special select committee for review, and Republicans have objected to that and are seeking here to table her resolution. This is a 15-minute vote on the House floor and the very first recorded vote of the 112th Congress. Ohio Republican John Boehner was elected by the House as the 61st Speaker. The vote 241 for John Boehner. Speaker Pelosi, former Speaker Pelosi, now the Minority Leader, with 173 votes in that, and 19 votes went elsewhere, including 11 for Heath Shuler of North Carolina. John Boehner not in the chair, but his fellow Ohio Republican Steve LaTourette is the Speaker pro tem at the moment, presiding over the first recorded vote of the 112th, a procedural vote, seeking to table a resolution by District Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton. She is one of 5 delegates who serve different places like American Samoa and Guam, and of course the resident commissioner from Puerto Rico. Under the proposed rules package that the House will take up later on, those delegates, that resident commissioner from Puerto Rico, would lose the ability to preside over or vote during the Committee on the Whole, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union, when they gather for consideration of legislation. This, again, is a motion to table that, and the motion proposed by Eric Cantor, the new Majority Leader of the U.S. House.
this vote, the yeas are 225, the nays are 188. Is agreed to, is adopted without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 hour.
Madam Speaker, I yield the hour to the gentleman from California and ask unanimous consent that he be permitted to control that time.
Without objection, the gentleman from California is recognized.